Hello, welcome to Science News. For me, it's the return of Science News. I actually stopped doing it a couple months ago on my other YouTube channel, but this is sort of a test run to see if I can't start it back up again. Uh, as I mentioned, I did Science News for about 5 years, a monthly recap of all the news related to archaeology, paleontology, space, nature, and medicine. But that's about my entire expertise when it comes to science, just kind of reporting it and hope I was getting it right. Uh, Terry, why don't you tell us your actual science education?
Oh God. Well, education is a strong word. So I taught biology, environmental science, marine science, general science, for in school, both like basically sixth grade through 12th grade, intermittently for different periods of time. I taught environmental education. I was like field trip teacher for a while. My undergrad is in archaeology and environmental science. So I have a lot of like weird averaging out at about like seventh to ninth grade.
What is your favorite field of science?
Biology. Um, Specifically, I really like environmental science, genetics, just really all biology. Maybe not like microbiology because that just gets a lot.
I think my favorite field has to do with kind of like zoology in terms of the intelligence of creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Another series I ran on my other YouTube channel was called Conscious Creatures, where I basically spent 20 minutes cataloging all the various ways that specific animals have exhibited intelligence, ranging from tool use to their brain capacity to many different examples. So I covered bottlenose dolphins. Most interesting aspect that I found of them was that they have their own names. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Not only do they have multiple calls, but they have a unique call specific only to them that they call out to identify themselves to
Mm-hmm.
others.
Yeah, they reference each other too, don't they? Like they have it documented that they'll like talk about other dolphins, which I think is super cool.
But I covered bottlenose dolphins. I covered corvids, the smartest birds. Also use tools, can solve equations, puzzles. Um, Elephants, orcas, chimpanzees, and octopuses. To me, those were the six smartest creatures, and they're like on the verge of getting conscious thought. Like they're so close to it. And I'm wondering what the breaking point will be in terms of their evolution to get to that final step.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's my favorite. All right, let's get into the science news. And of course, the biggest piece of science news that's happening right now, something I was reporting on for like 3 years straight, is the James Webb Telescope finally revealed its images, the first 5 images. First up is sort of an updated deep field image. Now, they've taken this picture before with the Hubble, side by side comparison there. So it was nice to get an updated picture of it. And the way they described it was that it's like taking a grain of sand, holding it at arm's length, holding it up to the sky, and that's how much sky they looked at in that picture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all those galaxies in just that tiny, tiny, tiny amount of sky. Um, what do you think about an image like that? What does that say about not only galaxies, but specifically, how do you feel our current model of the Big Bang Theory and expansion is? Are we still like within the realm of like, yes, the universe could have expanded that much that quickly?
Yeah, that was like two different questions. So I love seeing images like that because it just kind of illustrates like how big space is. And I think when in terms of things like, the Big Bang Theory and just like, things just kind of like the origins of the universe. I feel like it's very hard for people to grasp like how much time and how much space we're talking about. You said my background is more in biology, so like, I talk about things like evolution and that's a whole thing. But like, it's the idea that's like, no, you have reference of, however old you are alive, but we're talking in terms of Earth, billions of years, and in terms of the galaxies and the universe, like, billions and billions and billions and billions of years. So I think there's pretty good evidence of that sort of movement and of that expansion outward. I think it's just very hard to like wrap your mind around the amount of time and space that there is to work with. Because I think a lot of the argument against those things is just that like, oh, well, like, how could all of these things just happen? It's like, well, yeah, they're not just happening. They're happening over billions and billions of years. So I don't know.
All right. The next image that was revealed this morning was kind of a letdown to me because they kept building it up as we're going to see an exoplanet. Well, we didn't actually see it. It was a reading on its atmosphere, WASP 76b. And, they were able to see exactly what was in its atmosphere, specifically water vapor. Still very cool. I was hyped up in my own mind of seeing an exoplanet with the, telescope, but,
How far away is it?
It's at like 1,000 light years away.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they just kept saying exoplanet, so I was like, oh, goodness. But they followed that up with a cluster of very close galaxies, 5 galaxies in total that are very close together. Four of which are kind of dancing around each other. They're like near missing each other in some sort of weird ballet.
Yeah. Generally, they would merge eventually.
Probably, but I think because it's so many of them that just happen to be like so close together, it's like throwing it all out of whack. Because our own galaxy is eating up smaller galaxies around us as we speak, and eventually we're going to get eaten up by the Andromeda galaxy. So, all right. Next up, they revealed an image of a dying star. So right in the middle there, I think that's a star in the background, to be honest with you, like behind it. But there's a star that collapsed right in the middle, and that kind of like egg-like layer is a cloud of dust that was pushed out from that star collapsing. And then their final image they revealed was a nebula and all the stars being created. I mean, really, really gorgeous images.
Yeah, that's cool.
They revealed, of course, NASA is going to be working basically nonstop on new photos of not only just distant galaxies, but nearby star systems, and also close-up images of planets and objects in our own solar system. So
neat. Are they going to get actual pictures of Venus, you think?
I don't know about Venus. They mentioned Mars and outward, so I don't think Venus is on the table. However, that's not as big a deal because right now, ever since they found the unique chemicals in the clouds of Venus, I think they have 2 different probes being created as we speak to go back to Venus. Their launch projection is sometime in the 2030s.
Nice.
Because it was big news, because it was chemicals that could only be made, as we know of, made by biological material. So they were like, what does this mean? Is there bacteria in the clouds of Venus? Who knows? Is that the alien life, All right, next up, scientists in Tokyo have grown living human skin around a robotic finger. While this caused a lot of people to scream out Terminator, the true practical application of human skin around an artificial limb would have many useful purposes, ranging from people with prosthetics to robotics themselves being given skin with nerve endings to understand outside stimuli better, such as a robot sensing how much pain could be involved in something before testing it on a human. Next story should be more up your alley. In the Borneo rainforest, a biologist discovered a new type of carnivorous pitcher plant that set their traps underground as opposed to above ground. Beetles and ants are the typical prey for this species of pitcher plant, obviously, because what other type of insect is going to be in the ground? Carnivorous plants, such as the Venus flytrap, evolved to eat meat as a way to get nitrogen in places where the soil couldn't sustain them. What do you think about carnivorous plants?
I think they're really cool. They're really cool from like an evolutionary standpoint because it's, very much we live in places where the soil is not great. How can we survive? The soil does not have a lot of nitrogen. Well, what else makes nitrogen? Decomposing bodies. Let's go. So I think that's cool. Pitcher plants especially are very cool just because of the way that they're structured and their kind of niche in ecosystems. I think is pretty neat. I'd never heard about the underground ones, so that's pretty cool too.
Very recent news. All these news stories happened in the last month.
Mm-hmm.
I think carnivorous plants are kind of frightening, to be honest with you. Just because I wouldn't know what to do in a situation. Like, they're very immobile. That's on our side right now. Eventually, the plants will come to get us.
No, I mean, there would have to be some pretty significant changes in all of them. Like, I don't think like dryads or what ants are too high on your things to worry about yet.
What I find most interesting about carnivorous plants is the fact that they've evolved to eat meat around the world. You've got pitcher plants out in Southeast Asia. You have the Venus flytraps in the swamps of North Carolina, whereas the pitcher plants are more rainforest. So you have two entirely different ecosystems, but evolved in a way to get that nitrogen that they need to survive. Obviously, very different methods. However, the end result of eating insects. And then just last year was the discovery of a flower in Canada that was eating insects. On its stem were little follicles that were catching the flies. Again, different method.
Yeah, convergent evolution is one of the coolest things in biology that happen. Just the idea that, or how different things develop completely separate from each other, like they don't have any significant common ancestry, but because they happen to be living in somewhat similar environments, they evolve in similar ways with similar adaptations despite not being related to each other.
I think the most interesting example of convergent evolution is just the ability to fly. You have several different types of creatures ranging from, you have dinosaurs that learned to fly. Eventually they became birds. You have lizards that learned to fly, such as pterosaurs. Pterosaurs like pterodactyls and stuff, they weren't dinosaurs, they were lizards. And you have mammals that learn to fly. Bats. So it blows my mind. Next up is a dozen different clinical trials have started on a new delivery system for the COVID-19 vaccine. If successful, having it distributed to people via a nasal spray could get more people vaccinated, especially people who, for whatever reason, don't trust the shot. COVID keeps mutating, like all viruses do. And remember, COVID itself is a strain of the SARS virus that started spreading over a decade ago. And it's why the current vaccine was able to be developed as quickly as it was. It wasn't just because it was an emergency situation. It wasn't just because so many people were working on it all of a sudden. It was because for over a decade, they've been working on a vaccine for SARS. So they had a jumping off point to get going on the COVID vaccine. Have you run into any people who are skeptical of the COVID vaccine?
Of course. Not too many really anymore.
About 2 months ago, someone I work with told me it was a means for Bill Gates to kill us all.
It's really specific.
Mm-hmm. Blows my mind. And I've known a few people who refuse to get it.
Yeah, it just seems, I don't know. If nothing else, I feel like it's just inconvenient at this point. But
well,
I don't know.
It's that if they don't get vaccinated and it keeps spreading, it'll keep mutating.
Yeah. Well, what also blows my mind is like there's so many countries that I was just hearing that I think in Africa, which, you know, the continent of Africa, I think it's like only a fifth of the population is vaccinated still.
Well, it's difficult to distribute the vaccine to more rural areas or areas that are dangerous to be in, you know.
Mm-hmm. But even that, it was just, you know, just supply chain. And of course, you know, Europe and America and, you know, the countries that had it, they didn't want to share it. And then they wanted to. And then it was, you know, just it's just kind of mind blowing that, you know, we have the ability to, you know, we made the vaccine and then we made the booster and now we're making nasal sprays. And like there's still so many people out there that want it and, you know, can't get access to it for whatever reason. Whereas, you know, so many people are just like, no, I don't trust Bill Gates, so I'm not going to use a technology that's been around for over 100 years at this point.
I've literally had people tell me it was a hoax, that nobody's died from it. I'm like, tell that to all the dead people.
Ugh.
All right. Next up is the world's largest bacterium was discovered, and it can be seen with the naked eye, about the size and shape of an eyelash. It's even stranger than just being large. The DNA of the bacteria usually just floats inside the cell body. This same bacteria actually holds its genetic material in a specialized sac surrounded by a membrane to better protect it. And it was found in mangrove forests in the Lesser Antilles, which is in the Caribbean. So not the larger islands, the smaller islands.
Yeah.
Interesting piece of evolution there.
That's kind of terrifying, honestly.
When they first saw it, they actually saw it like a long time ago, but they thought it was a eukaryote because of how large it was. And it turns out, no, it's just the world's largest bacteria, and you can see it. But that and the pitcher plant brings up an interesting point about rainforests. There are plenty of things there that we don't know about, you know, centered around these tropical areas around near the equator.
Science cat.
So, you know, who knows what else is out there, but how do you safely investigate rainforests without messing with an ecosystem?
Right. Yeah, and it's really crazy just how little I'm gonna get rid of this cat. How little we actually know about so many places, because it's just like the ocean and rainforests and even, you know, just places that we always kind of thought, oh, there's just not a whole lot there, and there really is. And there is that balance of, you know, how do you study things and not without destroying them or disturbing them. And it's cool to think how much is actually out there and how much of things that, you know, nobody really thought about or, you know, thought was interesting or thought there was anything, you know, kind of worth looking at, And it just kind of takes one person to be like, hey, let's take a look at this. Let's look at the forest canopy, or let's look at mangrove trees. And
I mean, reporting on science news in the past few years, there's been plenty of discoveries, and there's probably plenty more to come. All right, next up, stone tools found in England belong to a previously unknown community of hominids that lived there about 600,000 years ago. Now, this is long, long before Homo sapiens and Neanderthals spread across the continent. There is a ton of hominid diversity that we know very little about, and the use of tools indicates that they were one of the smarter species of hominids out there. Now, I mean, a lot of people know about Neanderthals. Probably the next best known species of hominid other than humans were the Denisovans.
Mhm.
And both of them live on in our DNA. Neanderthal DNA, widely seen in European DNA. And Denisovans, they were common in the Asia area, but Southeast Asia as well. And it's actually in Papua New Guinea where a good amount of people still have Denisovan DNA. What does that tell you? 600,000 years ago, we had hominid species evolving enough to use tools.
Mhm.
Now, earlier I talked about all the other creatures that are out there that use tools. Dolphins attach sponges to the ends of their noses or snout or whatever you want to call it to safely go through coral when they're feeding. Corvids use tools. They use cars as tools. There's clips of corvids, such as crows, taking a nut, laying it in the street so that a car can run over it and they can get to the actual nut inside. Chimps obviously have toolkits of sticks that they use for termite mounds, varying lengths, or a fisherman lure type stick. So 600,000 years ago, we had hominids using tools. And look at where hominids ended up. What do you think that means for those other species? Or is humanity wrecked this earth too much to really allow them to develop further?
Hold on. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wait, I can't hear you. Hold on. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, my roommates are like listening to something. Um, what was the actual question? I'm sorry, I was having audio issues, but I got most of it. But what was the actual question?
So 600,000 years ago, we had this hominid species using tools.
Mhm.
And we know where hominids eventually ended up with humanity. What do you think
Mhm.
that says for all the other creatures out there who use tools, such as elephants, chimps,
Mhm.
dolphins? Will their evolution eventually take them to the same conscious level that humanity has? Or do you think that humanity has sort of wrecked this planet a little too much for them to develop?
I don't know, because I feel like when you talk about consciousness or intelligence, it's kind of what is it you're actually using to gauge that? Because I think a lot of times, in terms of, so evolution is all about like finding a niche. And fittest does not necessarily mean like the smartest or the strongest. It just means what works out the best for that species, or for that whatever.
For
So
example, humans have a very wide diet. Humans can eat a lot of different things. One
mhm.
of the creatures I talked about is corvids. also evolved to eat a wide variety of things. And that allowed them to spread basically around the world without relatively little trouble, same as humans. So humanity eventually developed its intelligence because it helped them succeed better. You know, things like morality developed because it helped communities survive better. Humanity survived better with morality. So, my question is, we had the freedom to evolve that way because there were no other species that could reach our level of intelligence at the time. Now, one of these other species, you know, they could be where we were at, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, right now, or even closer. But can they really get there with our interference?
Are you talking about us? Are you talking about like us purposely,
Not purposely, unintentionally,
or just
but
because we have already done it? We're gonna screw the planet up too much for anybody else to get that chance.
well, I mean, we can talk about how much climate change might affect their chance to really succeed.
Yeah, I don't know because I don't know. I think humans in terms of like creatures and species that have been on the earth, humans have not been around for that long.
Right. They eventually.
We're also not. Interesting thing about humans is like we're actually not very genetically diverse compared to other species.
Well, hominids were able to evolve better because we spread out. We our population exploded because of our success. That allowed for more mutations. That allowed for different opportunities.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our humans' main advantage is our ability to communicate with each other and work together. And, the ability to kind of work I think it's kind of the idea of, being able to work towards a common goal. Whereas with most animals, it's, very goal oriented in terms of like, food, water, shelter, survival, make babies, species
But
continues.
that's the thing. Corvids, they play.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, but I think that also has there's a benefit to that, because a lot of times, species that play, it's, you're practicing hunting, you're learning to work together, you're learning to communicate.
The corvid that was caught on film playing, was sliding down a snowy roof. There was no purpose to it other than the exhilaration and the fun of it. But for example, dolphins, spread out, they could evolve just fine on their own. But the question is, can they, due to rising temperatures, due to
Right.
the industry, due to Japan slaughtering them en masse?
Well, I just think that the idea of, they need to evolve more. Like, I don't think.
Well, I'm not saying they need to. I'm saying, will they have the opportunity?
Yeah. I mean, they might, but I also just, again, like, I don't know what made humans different. Like, I don't know why we have like the big brain. I also not really fully convinced that like we are the pinnacle of evolution that all other species should aspire to. Like, I think
say that
sponges have been able to survive for millions of years. Yeah. They're doing great.
I mean, what evolved the best? I mean, in terms of reaching the same level of intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if the question is, do I think it's possible? Maybe, sure. I also feel like it might not be in the same way because, again, like the steps involved in like it's very specific, and we were talking about convergent evolution before, and like I think it's possible that they might reach that level of like being able to communicate and consciousness and goal orientation, but I don't know if there's any real advantage to that for them.
Well, dolphins, they communicate with each other. They have goals. They live in pods. They work towards a common goal when it comes to hunting, similar to early humans and hominids, I should say. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and in some ways, the evolution is very similar in terms of humans because of mammalian evolution. elephants, chimps, and dolphins. They're pretty spread out. However, they've all developed the same type of brain that humans did in terms of folds in the brain, spindle cell neurons. Spindle
Mhm.
cell neurons are the neurons in the brain that allow for quicker communication from brain to body part.
Right.
So, I mean, an elephant having spindle cell neurons, same as humans, is certainly an interesting convergent evolution considering how far back, even though
Mhm.
we're mammals, how far back we split. So, but then you got to wonder about corvids and octopuses who use tools, can solve problems, can solve puzzles. However, their brains are wildly different than mammals.
Mhm.
Corvids are interesting because they have a prolonged adolescence, whereas the vast majority of birds don't. And it's in prolonged adolescence, the same as humans have, the same as elephants have, that helps develop their brain power. Whereas octopuses are so unique, they don't have a prolonged adolescence. The average
Mhm.
lifespan of an octopus is only a couple of years, but they manage to get a high level of intelligence while being so far away from everything else. And they're not even the top apex predator. They're hardly apex predators. Octopuses are basically bags of meat that other sea creatures try to eat, but they communicate with each other. They change colors, to communicate to each other. I mean, it's pretty wild when you compare octopuses to every other
Mhm.
intelligent creature because they are just way off the beaten track.
Yeah, and they even the way that they've evolved is completely different than all other than most other species. Just the way that they've gotten to that point. Because yeah, it's as far as invertebrates go, there's no other species that even compares to cephalopods, which is pretty crazy.
All right, we got a bit of a tangent there, but the last piece of science news is uh, now a couple times in the past few years I've reported on a brain-eating amoeba that has been killing people in Florida and Texas, and it looks like this amoeba has struck again, infecting someone in Iowa, the Nagliari fowleri. It swims in through the nose, attaches itself to the brain, um, and starts eating away at it. It happens in freshwater areas such as rivers, lakes, and even in one case in Texas, it happened at a splash pad at a public park. Um, Now, the issue is, before, it was happening mainly in Texas and Florida. The fact that it happened in Iowa means that it's moving further north. Why is it moving further north? Because it can now, because it actually requires warmer waters to survive. And as climate change makes waters warmer, the further north you go, more interesting creatures will work their way up. I know one worry that a lot of people had was mosquitoes, going further and further north and just completely causing problems because of how many diseases mosquitoes can carry, such as the Zika virus. Uh, but it's very rare. Don't get me wrong. In the past few decades, there have only been like 140 cases. The issue is that it's a 94% mortality rate. Only like 6 people have survived when they've gotten this amoeba. So it's a very successful killer when it does infect someone. You want to talk about creepy evolution? That's an amoeba right there that can kill people. And that is it for science news, unless you had something else you've seen, Terry.
Not really. I get my yeah. I'd hope to look into possibly some more stuff today, but my 30-minute commute turned into a 2-hour commute, so I feel wildly underprepared for
Uh,
this. I apologize.
it's still better to have your input, seeing as how you have an actual education in science, whereas I'm just a nerd who likes science.
I mean, books are books. at the end of the day,
What is your opinion of people who claim to have scientific knowledge like me when I really don't?
Well, I mean, I think people are capable. I think
science,
anybody is capable of doing research, and anybody is capable of educating themselves. I think there is a level of base knowledge that anybody can obtain, and I think should obtain, especially if it's something that interests you. Now, I'm not going to go argue with somebody who has a PhD, because I understand that they have spent much more time and energy learning about a thing than I do. But I think even listening to somebody that has more of an education on a particular topic or has done more research on a particular topic is good. But
to give it an analogy, when my doctor tells me what to do, I just do what she tells me to do. I'm not going to sit there and say, I don't know if the doctor knows what she's talking about. No, she's going to know a hell of a lot more than me.
Yeah. I think there's nothing wrong with being skeptical. I think being skeptical is a big part of science in general, but it's also, skepticism with a purpose. Like, I think it's fine to,
I think it takes a big ego for me to question the expertise of someone who has a lot more training or decades of knowledge versus me who has the internet.
Yeah, no, definitely. But also, that's the thing with biology, and why I both love, and I feel like people have very love-hate relationship with biology in general, because it's so, the best way I can describe it is squishy, in that there's so much we don't understand, and there's so many exceptions to so many rules, and just things like, we talk about diseases, or where things come from, or how genes work, or genetics, and that's a field where there's so much we don't know. And you doing science news, know that new things are being discovered all the time, and we're constantly learning new things, which and I think it's I don't think anybody should just kind of blindly accept the first opinion or source that they hear for things. I think it's kind of a matter of evaluating everything. But when you've got rando website that's putting malware on your computer versus something written by a doctor that you can confirm the sources of, those are two very different sources, and
yeah, we don't get into confirmation bias.
Yeah, and that's a whole other thing. Yeah. I don't know. It's just,
all right.
It's hard because I think there's definitely we talk about facts versus opinions, but there's definitely it's hard because a lot more things are subjective than you think they are. The cat was weird stuff under the.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Science News. And if you'd like to see more, let us know. Thank you so much. Bye.